grade 11 students. I hope you are all doing great. Welcome to Module 4. In Module 3, you have studied about verbal and nonverbal communication, their characteristics, concepts, importance, types, and what to consider when engaging in those types of communication. In Module 4, we will focus on intercultural communication, which, let me tell you, is a type of interpersonal communication. But you might be asking why we are centering on just intercultural communication when we have other interpersonal communication contexts, just like mass communication, public communication, etc. Well, personally, I think this topic is very important and relevant, especially that ethnocentrism and stereotyping is still at a rampage everywhere. For you to be effective communicators, you must know how to engage in this type of communication, which is intercultural communication. And hopefully, this module will help you in that score. At the end of the module, you are expected to acquire or to perform the following: to A, define intercultural communication, to identify concepts and barriers to intercultural communication, and to demonstrate effective intercultural skills in a speech situation. Before we start, let's go down the memory lane for a bit and think of a certain point in time when we experienced miscommunication with people from different cultures. How was the experience? Well, try as I might, I can't think of my own experiences. It's either I am a very forgetful person or that I have communicated well with people from different cultures. Well, I don't know, I'm not sure, but maybe I have such an experience, but I just can't remember at this point. But why don't I show you some examples of intercultural miscommunication or blunders, which I hope will not only prime you with our topic at hand, but also to remind us to be more tactful with our words. So here goes. Let's have example number one. Okay. So this one has been viral very recently. So the Department of Education garnered criticism on social media over an illustration in one of their learning modules depicting the family of a farmer in apparently impoverished state. The family members are shown wearing tattered clothes, while some of the children barely wore anything. Although the accompanying story is okay, as it tells how the farmer needs to work hard for his family, the photo is misrepresenting the farmers in general. And this, my dear students, is an example of insensitivity towards the social status of a certain group of people, which is the farmers in this case. Let's take a look at another example. So this one happened back in 2009 when Candy Pangilinan, a Filipino comedian, cracked a joke during her stand-up comedy act held in SM Baguio, wherein she said, quote, "Tao po ako, hindi po ako igorot," unquote. This, of course, drew strong criticisms from the Igorot community. They were deeply insulted by Candy's remarks. As we know, Baguio is a city full of Igorot people. As a result of this blunder, Candy was declared persona non grata by the Baguio City Council. And although Candy apologized numerous times about her remark, it was already too late. So there. Okay, so this one is an ad for a Ford hatchback car way back in 2013 created by JWT India, in which it shows women bound and gagged in the trunk of a Ford car. According to Fromowitz, the writer of the article I read, it depicts reality TV star Paris Hilton here at the back, and what appeared to be Kim Kardashian and her two sisters, Courtney and Chloe, up in the trunk of the car. The tagline is, quote, leave your worries behind with Figo's extra large boot, unquote. Seriously, what are these people doing? Anyway, I'm not really a fan of the Kardashians, but regardless of whoever are represented in the advertisement, this is extremely sexually offensive, targeting a particular group, which is women. And what really made it as an intercultural communication blunder is that the fact that the controversial poster was uploaded for public view at a time when India was in crisis over sexual assault on women. This was back when this was back in a time when a 23-year-old student was sexually assaulted by a group of men in New Delhi, India, in where she later died from her injuries. Okay, so there. Next, we have this. This one is a sports gear released by Nike back in 2013, featuring a women's leggings product inspired by a traditional tattoo, which is a tattoo from the Southwest Pacific. Okay, so at first glance, this seemingly doesn't look like it is an intercultural blunder because it is just a design. But the use of the traditional tattoo by Nike here is a faux pas or a mistake because the tattoo is actually reserved for men, not for women. And don't get me wrong, they are not being sexist or what, but the tattoo is actually considered sacred by the Samoan people, and using the design for women is deemed inappropriate. Remember, tattoo falls under nonverbal communication, and we have studied as well that tattoos have certain meanings for certain cultural groups, and we need to be sensitive about those. Sadly, that's not what happened with Nike. Now, I'm quite sure that there are still multifarious intercultural blunders out there, and these are just a few examples. So, how come these are intercultural blunders? It's time to look into intercultural communication. Let's look into its definition. What are the basic behaviors that we need to adapt to be interculturally competent? The barriers to intercultural communication, and also let's take a look at a particular structure that looks into this particular aspect of communication. Let's begin with the definition of intercultural communication. Intercultural communication is simply communication transpiring between or among people with different languages and cultures. Culture, though, is not only made up of shared languages or countries or nationalities. In contrary to definition number three here, which says communication among people with different nationalities, uh, because it is because intercultural communication is made up of different social groups in the same setting. For instance, we have Metro Manila. As we know, Manila is a melting pot of disparate people with diverse cultures and backgrounds. People come from different places all over the Philippines, if not all over the world. In particular, different cultures of Muslims, Catholics, and Protestants, or even Ilocanos, Visayas, Batangueños, Pampangueños, coexist in the same region, which is Manila. And this what we call, and this is what we call a social group, and this what we call social groups rather, bring with them their own cultural backgrounds. Some scholars tend to view intercultural communication as one transpiring between or among people with different nationalities, but others' definition of it, though, is more encompassing, as it views intercultural communication as being influenced by factors such as ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, language, geographical location, social class, and assumptions. Now, um, no matter how we look at it, this type of communication is very essential as it gives us a practical framework on how to properly respond using verbal and nonverbal cues to other people with a culture that is different from ours. For example, when interacting with an Indian tourist, we make use of our cultural greet to determine the right way to act and to speak with him or her. Intercultural communication also helps us to understand the Indian tourist's gestures or messages, gestures or messages rather. And this applies as well to other people with religions, sexual orientations, languages, social classes, ethnicities that are different from our own. Okay, so one thing that we need to understand is that every single person is a cultural being. Our own or individual culture is something that we share with other people, just like our political views or the traditions that we follow. Also, we don't just belong to one cultural group in particular. On the contrary, we belong to different cultural groups or subcultural groups. And it was mentioned earlier that our culture is greatly influenced by, it's greatly made up of things and influenced by things such as geographical location, language, social class, religion, as well as ethnicity, gender, age, beliefs, and values and assumptions. And we amalgamate all those things when we bring them all together. We call it as a cultural identity of a person. And also, cultural identity is something that can be learned. What we think, how we interpret and react to messages are all influenced by the people around us, whether they may be our friends, our family members, the community around us, or even with what we see in the media these days. This means to say that culture is not stagnant, it evolves according to how we are influenced by things around us. One thing more, cultural identity varies in strength and content, depending in the setting, the situation, or context. To illustrate, our language and habits as a Filipino are strong when we are, of course, in the Philippines, but they become less useful when we are in a foreign country, since they are not enough to help us communicate effectively. It is because the geographical location that we are situated at the moment in time is different. In engaging in intercultural communication, one thing that we need to master is intercultural competence. And what is it? According to Huber and Reynolds, it enables us to interact with other people with different cultures in which we apply our skills in understanding attitudes and values in a certain communication exchange. This includes acceptance, respect, open mindedness, and sensitivity when it comes to our communication with people with different cultures. And according to them, Notes and Huber, it comprises of 8 basic behaviors. We have display of respect, orientation of knowledge, empathy, interaction management, task role behavior, relational role behavior, tolerance of ambiguity, emotional expression, and interaction posture. So let's go through them one by one. Display of respect. So this one is a fundamental value that has been instilled in our minds ever since we can remember. Our parents, grandparents, elders, teachers, adas, kuyas, you name it, have all hardwired us to respect others or to show respect to others. In intercultural communication, we simply apply the concept we have learned of respect towards accepting or understanding other cultures that are different from ours rather. We may have different customs or beliefs or values with that of other people, but when we display respect, that means we do not do anything that is judgmental, degrading towards other people with different cultures. As simple as that. And we must always put at the back of our minds that our words and actions may be misconstrued easily by other people with different cultures. That's why we need to be extra careful with our words. And we do not want the same thing that happened to Candy family men to happen to us. So there. Next, we have orientation of knowledge. So, aside from the outward display of respect when engaging in intercultural communication, we must also be knowledgeable in the underlying context that shapes a person's behavior and thinking. And the important question is, how do we become knowledgeable about those things? Well, we need to educate ourselves, and that can be done by reading or researching about other people's culture. Our goal is to have at least a considerable knowledge about other people's culture in order that communication breakdown can be minimized. Look at what happened to Nike in my example earlier. Um, the people behind Nike's marketing probably meant well with infusing the Samoan tattoo design. However, it turns out that their knowledge of the meaning and importance of the tattoo is rather superficial. And because of that, they committed an intercultural blunder. Next, we have empathy. Empathy is simply putting ourselves in the shoes of other people. It is virtually putting ourselves in their situation, thinking and feeling in their own perspectives. This involves our own capacity to behave as though we understand the world as others do. Surely you remember Aristotle's element of pathos. For instance, you are, let's say, a privileged young man or a young lady, and you are used to having helpers or kasambahays inside your home. When you interact with your kasambahay, you don't act condescendingly to him or her. You will not utter remarks such as, "Manang, let's go. I'll treat you. I bet you haven't eaten sushi in your entire life." That's not empathetic at all. Instead, you must uh, speak and act around your kasambahay regardless of her social status, even though she might be in a lower hierarchical class than you are. If you are perceived to be empathetic of where someone is coming from, communication will be more smooth and effective. Next, we have the interaction management. This one is pertaining to our skills in interactions, or simply how we regulate interactions. Do we know when and how to talk appropriately? Do we know how to speak in an engaging manner? Are we attentive enough to be able to acknowledge verbal and nonverbal cues given by our interlocutors? These are just some points that we need to consider when it comes to managing our interactions. Next, we have the task role behavior. So this pertains to behaviors that contribute to a group's problem solving activities. So each one of us performs tasks on a daily basis at work, at school, at home. Task role behavior involves tasks such as initiating new ideas, requesting further information or facts, seeking clarification of group tasks, evaluating the suggestion of other people, and keeping a group on task, which are all about fulfilling individual duties to achieve teamwork. With intercultural communication, however, these tasks are not defined the same over cultural boundaries. One culture may define a specific activity as a work task, and others may define the same task as a work activity. For instance, many cultures expect that getting acquainted rather, face at a restaurant is imperative prior to doing business. This is considered to be a part of the work task. Yet, for other cultures, such as the American cultures, Americans view having dinner or drinks, even with a potential client, as already socializing. One thing more with regards to task role behavior in intercultural communication, Koreans, for instance, do not respond favorably to ideas that depart from the majority. So it's one thing that we should keep in mind uh, as regards to task role behavior in intercultural communication. Also, when doing business with Brazilians, they actually prefer face to face interactions rather than doing business over the phone or the internet or fax. But of course, with this current dire situation that we have now, maybe an exception can be made. But it is also one thing that a person should keep in mind when engaging in communication with them. Next, we have the relational role behavior, which relates to the way a person builds or maintains relationships in order to achieve harmony, teamwork, and productivity. What is the appropriate behavior for a friend, a colleague, or an acquaintance? The answers to these questions vary depending on the culture. For example, Americans value straightforwardness and they expect a friend to tell them openly about their opinion when asked. Other cultures, however, are less direct. In Korean culture, for instance, uh, according to my research, it is much preferable for Koreans to lie rather than to disagree with their elders. So their faces should never show that they find their elders disagreeable either. In our culture, on the other hand, it is considered rude or lepastangan, as we call it, when we talk back to our parents or elders, even when we are just trying to prove a point, right? Well, that's just one relational role behavior among Filipinos that is already ingrained in our culture, and it's pretty much hard to disregard at this point. Next, we have tolerance of ambiguity, which concerns a person's response to new and unpredictable situations. Some people prefer to react to new situations with greater ease than do others, who may show either anxiety, rudeness, apathy, and may even be confrontational at times. As a confident intercultural communicator, you'll be able to cope with nervousness and frustrations that accompany new situations in order for you to show that you are accepting and appreciative of the cultures of other people, even though their culture may conflict with yours. And lastly, we have emotional expression and interaction posture. This refers to the ability to respond um, to others in a way that is non-judgmental or non-evaluative. Although the specific verbal and nonverbal messages that express judgments and evaluations can vary from culture to culture, the importance of selecting messages that do not convey judgmental remarks is paramount. When engaging in intercultural communication, cultures may clash with other cultures, and of course, conflict becomes inevitable. Leishman and Dufresne identify six barriers to intercultural communication which lead to communication breakdown. So when we interact with people with different cultural backgrounds, we keep in mind to avoid any of the barriers in this uh, subsequent slides. So here goes. Number one is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the tendency for people to believe that their own cultural norms are the right way of doing things. In ethnocentrism, people tend to make use or apply their own culture or ethnicity as a frame of reference in judging or evaluating other cultures, practices, behaviors, beliefs that they are not really accustomed to. Remember that adage, people don't like things that they don't understand? Since people are accustomed to a particular culture, when they are confronted with something that is unfamiliar or disparate from their own, they mistakenly believe that their own way of doing things, their practices, their beliefs, their customs, etc., are the right way and only way to do things, and that others which are different are wrong or unacceptable. Also, one thing about ethnocentrism is that people have this assumption that their culture is valued and accepted in a universal scale. But that's only a myopic way of looking at things. One example of ethnocentrism is the Ku Klux Klan's principle of white supremacy. The Ku Klux Klan, or also known as the KKK, was a racist and anti-Semitist group who thinks that the white race is the superior race, and they primarily targeted African American people, as well as Jews, immigrants, homosexuals, and Muslims, basically groups who they think are inferior to them. They think they usually resorted to violence, just like lynching. And what's terrible about it is that the KKK thought that what they were doing was right. Another example is Adolf Hitler's belief in the Aryan race supremacy back in World War II. Just like the KKK, during Hitler's reign as a Nazi leader in World War II, his group, the Nazi Party, discriminated against a certain group, the Jews primarily. Not only the Jews, but also homosexuals and people with disabilities. It didn't matter whether the ones concerned were children or babies or elderly, just the fact that they were inferior and unacceptable to them. This led to the Holocaust, the massacre and death of millions of Jews, considered as one of the worst atrocities in human history. One other example of ethnocentrism is the idea of mandate of heaven by the Chinese people. The mandate of heaven is proliferated by the philosopher Confucius, and according to it, the Chinese felt that they received divine power that entitled them to exert heavy rule or control over citizens, and that they had power over the rest of the world. So this may explain their taking brazen control and ownership of the Spratlys Islands and even the Paracel Islands, uh, which are both archipelagos in the South China Sea. At some instances, ethnocentrism isn't as serious as the examples I have recounted. It could be us thinking that our ethnic group or cultural group is better than someone else's. Let me recount my own experience. I studied at a university in Nueva Vizcaya when I was in college, and at that school is populated by a lot of Igorot people and Ifugao students. I remember most of them were often discriminated against by Ilocano students. The Ilocanos would make fun of the way they talk, their habits of speaking what we call as mama or nga everywhere, and just the total regard of them as being inferior to Ilocanos. They were called Highlanders because they were perceived to be coming from the mountains. And I remember one time when I read an article in our school paper that an Ifugao student spoke about the discrimination that they were receiving, and I couldn't help but pity her at that time because it's true. I just don't understand why some Filipinos practice ethnocentrism towards their fellow Filipinos. In order for us to avoid practicing ethnocentrism, we must always keep in mind that no culture, no group, no ethnicity, no nationality or race is better or less than the other. That no one holds monopoly over excellent quality. Next is stereotypes. Stereotypes are mental pictures that one group forms from the main characteristics of another group. In other words, stereotyping is overgeneralization or oversimplified view of other people or a group of people. Stereotypes can be according to one's religion, social class, age, or status, and they are often inaccurate and erroneous. An example of stereotype is the photo I showed you earlier in this presentation, the viral photo of the farmer with his family in tattered clothes. So in that particular photo, farmers and their families are stereotyped to be impoverished and ones who can't even decently clothe themselves. Well, yes, a lot of our Filipino farmers are not wealthy people, but it doesn't mean that all of them are like the ones represented in the picture. These Facebook posts by children of farmers are proof that Filipino farmers and their families are inaccurately represented in the DepEd module that I have shown you earlier. Or, yes, the one that became viral. Next, we have interpretation of time or interpretation of time. So, this one is the difference in the perception of time may affect how people view each other. Therefore, it also influences how they interact. So this is a review of the type of nonverbal communication that we have discussed in the last module, chronemics, which pertains to how cultures, to the study of how cultures perceive time and use time. Our differences when it comes to perception and utilization of time may have an effect on how we view and interact with other people. Let's say your family migrated to Canada and you start to work there. Remember, your Filipino culture is strong when you are in the Philippines, but when you relocate to another country, then your Filipino culture becomes really diminished. Actually, it's quite different than going to work there for the very first time. I don't think your boss will have good impressions. As a matter of fact, you will be regarded as unprofessional, most likely when you apply the Filipino time when you go there because Canadians view time as a valuable commodity. Next, we have personal space requirements. In all cultures, the distance between people functions in communication as personal space or personal territory. So every culture has cultural rules concerning physical space or proxemics between or among people during communication. Breaking any of these rules could be interpreted as impolite or even threatening. When we stand where we stand rather when we talk to someone is reflexive and it varies widely depending on our culture. In Saudi Arabia, for example, if a stranger moves close to an American to converse or to speak with him or her, the American might find himself or herself backing away. In the Middle East, social distance is closer than it is in the United States. Also, in Mongolia, when two people inadvertently bump each other, they must immediately shake hands, which in a sense reestablishes the correct personal space distance between them. But when someone bumps into you, let's say on a sidewalk in Tondo, Manila, would you react in the same way? Would you shake hands with the person who bumped you? I don't think so. Would you, or would you be alert and check if you still have your phone with you or your wallet with you? Most likely, the answer is yes to that latter question. Next, we have body language. So I have already mentioned this in the previous module that kinesics or body language is not universal. It is learned from one culture. Even the most basic body movements has varying cultural meanings. For instance, this familiar OK sign in North America is interpreted as zero in France, uh, mami in Japan, and in Bulgaria, it is actually, or Brazil rather, it is actually interpreted as a Bulgarian. So as we can see there, it depends on what culture we have. Next, we have translation limitations. Words in one language do not always have equivalent meanings in other languages. For example, words such as kilig, giggle, basta, umay, pasalubong, diskarte, and bitin have no direct translation in the English language. Even the most adept translator might find it challenging to translate these words to another language simply because of translation limitations. In such cases, we may make use of strategies in communication to send our messages across and to avoid miscommunication as much as possible. So there is a framework that explores and lays out how people experience cultural differences. This structure is called the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity, or DMIS. According to Bennett and Bennett, it has six stages. The first stage is denial. The second stage is defense. Third stage is minimization. The fourth one is acceptance, followed by adaptation, and lastly, the last stage is integration. Stage one is denial, in which the person fails or refuses to recognize cultural differences, or that a person doesn't consider that cultural differences exist at all. At this stage, a person might say, all cities are the same, they all have tall buildings, fast food chains, and coffee shops. This remark underscores overgeneralization in which a person thinks that there is only one culture and that culture is the one that he or she is exposed to or exposed with. Stage two is defense, in which a person starts to recognize that there are indeed cultural differences, that there exist other cultures disparate from his or her own, but then the person is intimidated by the other cultures that he views his or her own culture as either being superior or inferior to that of other cultures. He does this by defending his or her culture or that of other cultures as being either superior or inferior. At this stage, a person might say, this culture does not view life the way we do. Our culture is certainly better. Or, their ways are better than my own. I wish I were one of them. So, stage three is minimization, in which a person sees cultural differences but then focuses more on what brings him or her similar to others, or focuses more on the universality of ideas and beliefs rather than on the cultural differences. At this stage, a person might say, once we see through the cultural differences, we really are just the same. Stage four is acceptance, in which a person becomes aware of diverse cultural perceptions and begins to appreciate important cultural behaviors and values. A person at this stage might say, these people and I have different values and experiences, and I think we can learn from one another. Stage 5 is adaptation, in which a person starts to adapt his or her own reasoning and actions to the new culture or cultures that he or she has encountered. In this stage, a person becomes open minded in accepting new perspectives. A person at this stage might be heard saying, to address our issue or concern, I have to adjust my approach to consider both my own and my counterpart's background. So, as you can see, the utterance underscores how a person now adapts his actions or decisions to the culture he or she may have encountered. And the last stage is integration, in which a person starts to go beyond his or her own culture and begin to see himself or herself as being a part of the new culture he or she has encountered. At this stage, a person might say, I can look at things from the perspective of various cultures. So once you understand the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity structure, you may apply it to first recognize communication behaviors that are different or disparate from your own, to understand what influence such behaviors, and to determine how people with languages and cultures different from your own communicate differently. So that's it for this topic. I hope that in my own way, I help you in exploring the concepts of intercultural communication. And I hope that you engage in meaningful intercultural communication in the future and at all times. So, for any questions, I keep my lines open. Just send me your questions during class or business hours as much as possible, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions for you. So there. I will leave you with these words from Gautama Buddha, and it's also um, something that is in your module. Quote, whatever words we utter should be chosen with care, people will hear them and be influenced by them for good or ill. Unquote. Stay safe always, give your best shot at everything, and I'll be seeing you in the next module. Ciao!